I don't think the season's hanging in the balance. I think that there's a way that these sports teams can play. It's going to be difficult, and part of it's going to depend on just what the prevalence is. If we have a raging epidemic in the fall, the situation might be a little different. But these leagues have endless resources to throw at this, and I think that there's a way to create a protective bubble around the players. They can test the players in. They can test them quite regularly. They can implement procedures in the clubhouse and how the players interact that can reduce the risk of an outbreak on a team. I think the hardest aspect of this for them is going to be controlling the player behavior off the field, so making sure that players aren't putting themselves in situations where they can be exposed to the virus off the field. But inside the clubhouse and on the field, I think they can control the environment sufficiently that they can dramatically reduce the risk that you get an introduction, and certainly reduce the risk that an introduction leads to an outbreak in a team, in a clubhouse. So I think that there's a way that these leagues can get these games started. And the NFL seems to have put a lot of resources and thinking into this. And so I would suspect that they'll be able to pull it off.
Even if the NFL isn't going to the bubble, so to speak, practice that basketball is. Basketball is bringing everybody down to Orlando, keeping everybody together in one particular place. The NFL doesn't have a plan to do that. These teams are going to stay in their cities. The players are going to be in their homes and around the facilities. Is that a more dangerous prospect?
Well, it's a little harder, and that's why I said what's going to be difficult is controlling behavior off the field. They can test people into the clubhouse and control risk on the field and in the clubhouse. And so they need to have protocols in place for what the players are willing to do in their personal lives as well, in terms of not going out, reducing their risk of exposure in their daily lives. I assume the players are going to be willing to, agree to such plans because they want to play. Most of these players want to play. They have a short life expectancy, if you will, on the field. Their careers are short, and they don't want to give up a whole season. So I suspect most of the players are going to be willing to enter into agreements where they submit to do certain things that will reduce their risk of contracting the virus during the season. And again, that may change. The NFL may have to readdress that in terms of what the players do off the field if there's a high prevalence, if we really do have large epidemics or outbreaks in the fall. But those things can be adjusted. There's ways to do this. So I wouldn't give up on the NFL season. I certainly wouldn't give up on the NBA season. They're going to look a lot different, but there's ways to get these games started and get people watching sports again.
All right, good news to hear that. Let's talk now where we are nationally. You said today that some states are on the verge of, quote, losing control of their outbreaks. Of all of the outbreaks, Dr. Gottlieb, that we're seeing right now, which is the one that's most concerning to you tonight?
Well, probably Arizona, because they're coming up against their healthcare resources in the state, and they're going to have to start activating some of the surge capacity. And then you look at states that really don't have a lot of good controls in place, Alabama, South Carolina. Florida and Texas are also concerning. I think that they have more resources, and they've been a little bit more aggressive from the outset. But they have big numbers right now. Texas and Houston and Austin have pretty big numbers of infections, and they're rising quite quickly. One of the things you need to look at over the next week or so, probably next couple of days, next week, is the pace of the increases. If you start to see day-over-day increases that are very big as positivity rates continue to increase, that's a pretty good indication that you have pretty widespread community transfer underway.
Some are calling Florida the new epicenter. I'm wondering if you agree with that. Right now, they only have 25% of their ICU beds available.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Florida is in a worse bucket than any of these other states that we're talking about. I think they all have outbreaks underway. The outbreaks are regional inside these states, and so there's certain parts of the states that are hot right now. Florida has more epicenters, if you will. Miami-Dade looks hot, Palm Beach, Orlando, parts of near like Jacksonville, a little bit in the sort of center of the state. So there's more parts of that state that look like they have outbreaks underway. They still have a window of opportunity to get it under control. I think all these states do, but you continually see growth in cases, and you're not seeing really decisive action yet. So that has to be concerning.
President gave an interview this evening, late this afternoon, to the Wall Street Journal, in which he said testing was overrated. Testing obviously leads to higher cases. I'm wondering what you make of that comment, given that you were a member of the administration.
Well, really, all we have to keep a major epidemic from happening in the fall, which I think there's a possibility we will have a major epidemic of COVID in the fall, is testing, contact tracing, universal masking. If we don't want to shut down the economy again, and I think we're going to be very reluctant to do that, especially in advance of a political election, national election, we really have to fall back on the ability to get people tested very quickly and have people self-isolate when they're infected. And most people will be compliant. Most people will self-isolate. And so there's nothing else. I don't know what else we can fall back on besides trying to get as many people diagnosed as possible, get them into care as quickly as possible, and require people to wear masks when they're out in public to reduce the risk of transmission. That's really it. That's our toolbox. And if we don't do that, then we might as well just throw up our hands and accept that we're going to have a major epidemic. The hospital systems are going to come very pressed in the fall. And I think healthcare workers are going to start to pull back. They're not going to want to work in a system where they're not being helped by the political leadership.